Hello, welcome to this really interesting session on SRM, solar radiation management and development, and estimating the upside and confronting the limit. My name is Anna Yang. I work at Chatham House, and I will be your moderator for this session. And just very quick sort of setup around this session. This is an evidence-based conversation. The objective here is to weigh the different risks against very imperfect options as we move into a new era of climate impact. And this is just to be clear that we're not here to promote SRM, but we want to be able to have clarity on all these discussions on the measures of the benefit and also all the risks that are associated with it. For the panel today, we have Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Ghana, Mr. Samuel Okudzeto Ablakwa, who will do an opening remark. And then we will have follow-up conversations with Pascal Lamy, who's the Vice President of the Paris Peace Forum, the former Director General of the World Trade Organization, and the Chair of the Climate Overshoot Commission. We have Professor Michael Obersteiner, Director of Environment Change Institute, and the Science Advisor to the Overshoot Commission. And Mr. Oliver Morton, his day job is at The Economist, but he's written books on this topic and also very much involved in the space. Okay, Minister, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Anna. And let me begin by thanking the Paris Peace Forum for inviting us to participate, particularly on this very interesting topic. And it's a topic that I must admit that those of us in the Global South are not always invited to the table. And so this is the first invitation we are receiving on the vexed matter of SRM. And I want to thank you most sincerely for the invitation. As we confront the escalating impacts of climate change, SRM certainly presents a very provocative and an interesting prospect. It has to be said. And for developing countries, the question is not just whether SRM can work, but whether it can work for us. SRM, as the experts say, refers to a set of technologies designed to reflect a portion of the sun's energy back into space. In theory, this could stabilize global temperatures and reduce the frequency of climate shocks. For nations in the Global South, where climate vulnerability is high and adaptive capacity is low, this could mean fewer droughts, more predictable rainfall, and a reprieve from the heat stress that threatens agriculture. And interestingly, I was just discussing with my colleague the impact on our cocoa farms, being the world's largest producer of cocoa. It means your favorite chocolates will probably be running out, and we may have to think about other alternatives. Certainly the impact on healthcare, on infrastructure, and the general well-being of our people. But we must ask, at what cost? The science behind SRM is still evolving. Techniques like stratospheric aerosol injection remain largely untested at scale. We do not yet fully understand the long-term effects on weather systems, ecosystems, or human health. While SRM may offer temporary relief, it does not address the root cause of climate change greenhouse gas emissions. There is also the matter of governance. Who decides if, when, and how SRM is deployed? Will the voices of developing nations be heard, or will decisions be made in boardrooms and laboratories far removed from the communities most affected? Without inclusive governance, SRM risks becoming a tool of geopolitical imbalance rather than global solidarity. Ethically, we must confront the possibility of uneven outcomes. SRM could benefit some regions while harming others. It could create moral hazard, reducing the urgency to cut emissions, and it could deepen existing inequalities if not managed with transparency and justice. Yet there is hope. Initiatives like the Degrees Initiative are empowering scientists from the Global South to participate in SRM research, such as Prof. Mu Leontang from the University of Science in Malaysia, Dr. Francisco Estrada Parua from Mexico, Professor Babatunde Joseph Obiodun of the University of Cape Town, Dr. Portia Adade Williams, and Professor Samuel Okudzeto, both from my country, Ghana. These scientists are leading different projects funded by the initiative to study various aspects of solar radiation modification. This is to ensure that developing countries are not passive recipients of climate solutions, but active architects of its future. We must also consider inclusive research, build robust international frameworks that prioritize equity, transparency, and accountability, and never lose sight of the broader goal, a sustainable, just, and resilient world. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's sixth assessment report, which is the most comprehensive report to date, incorporating findings from 3 working groups and several special reports, confirm that human-induced climate change is causing widespread disruption. It emphasizes the urgent need for rapid, large-scale implementation of existing solutions, which are available now but not being deployed fast enough. The report highlights the current policies which are insufficient and that global warming will exceed 2 degrees Celsius by 2050, while also detailing the necessary system-wide transitions and solutions to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius and build climate resilience. The report indicates that climate change is already depressing economic performance, damages increase with additional warning, and impacts are even more clear on developing countries where we are domiciled and have greater concern about the impact of climate change. These findings, built on a decade of research linking temperature to economic growth and welfare, provide a baseline against which any cooling benefit must be judged. This brings us to the potential of SRM, a concept often met with skepticism, yet increasingly discussed as a potential temporary means of shaving some temperature off climate overshoot. When framed narrowly, SRM can be analyzed using the same tools we use to value climate damage and the social cost of greenhouse gases. Recent mortality studies suggest that in a world roughly 2.5% degrees Celsius warmer than pre-industrial levels, a 1 degree reduction in temperature could avert hundreds of thousands of heat-attributable deaths annually. And Ghana, it's an example of that, where particularly in northern Ghana, heat-induced epidemics is causing a lot of deaths. Crucially, these gains are concentrated in hotter, poorer countries, even after accounting for known health risks from aerosols and ozone layers. Parallel findings emerge from macroeconomic analysis, climate econometric models calibrated to historical temperature growth relationships project that stabilizing temperatures via SRM could modestly raise global output. More importantly, it could tilt benefits toward low latitude developing economies, thereby reducing income inequality between nations. Though thinner than the damage and mortality literatures, economic models also explore avoided adaptation. When SRM holds temperatures down, optimal adaptation spending falls, especially for rapid reactive measures, because fewer damages need to be absorbed. Proactive adaptation capital also grows more slowly as peak stress is moderated. These are model results, not forecasts, and they are explicit about dispersion and limits. But the direction of distributional change is robust. Moderate cooling could ease public budgets in heat-exposed low and middle-income countries, such as Ghana. Let us be clear, SRM is not a panacea at this point. It does not reverse all of the climate change concerns, but it cannot address ocean acidification and only gradually influences sea level rise. Major coastal adaptation will remain unavoidable. The spatial pattern of cooling and precipitation will not perfectly mirror a no warming world, meaning some regions may still face residual or shifted risk. This is an equity and insurance challenge that must be taken seriously. Moreover, SRM introduces its own risks, from stratospheric chemistry to governance failure and termination shock. If benefits persist only with sustained operation, making governance and monitoring not accessories but integral to its course. That is why the policy conversation is shifting not on whether to study SRM, but to how it should be studied. We are here for evidence-led conversation, as Anna has rightly indicated, and Ghana, as a key leader in the global climate change discussion, is happy to be part of this conversation. We are proud that as a country, we host the Climate Vulnerable Forum in Accra, and we are currently undergoing our NDC3 review ahead of the next COP. We have a climate prosperity plan, and we have only outdoored recently our green taxonomy framework policy, which is helping to mainstream climate change in all we do. We are also moving towards ensuring that our energy mix as a country is 20% renewable energy as our contribution. So we believe that these discussions are helpful, and at this point, every strategy, every opportunity to address this climate change threat, which is real, and this has to be emphasized because of this, the skeptics and the deniers who continue to take center stage. And so we welcome this conversation, and we are very delighted to be here and to join this eminent, distinguished panel to delve into these matters. And as policymakers, you can be assured that the outcomes of these conversations will reflect in our policies in the African Union and on the larger global stage as we continue to contribute to the climate change discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for such insightful remark. I'm going to ask Pascal, maybe who's the chair of the Climate Overshoot Commission, to share some of his reflections.
Thanks very much. I can be short because I share this point which the Minister just made from my position of chair of this Climate Overshoot Commission for a number of years now. And my view is the same as his view, which is that the conversation has shifted. And I think he has pretty well defined the way this conversation has shifted. We started with a mandate of the Climate Overshoot Commission, which was a Paris Peace Forum mandate, around the question of can it work? And we went into that, and we came to the conclusion that there were pros and cons, there were benefits, possible dangers, hence this idea of a moratorium. The conversation now is much more on can it work for us? Not just can it work, but can it work for us from a number of developing countries? And this is the new element. If I look at trying to characterize the conversation and the focus on the conversation and the intensity of the conversation, the intensity now comes from developing countries. And I think the reason for that is pretty simple, which is that in the meantime, which is roughly 4 years, the negative consequences of overshooting, which will happen, unfortunately, are much more obvious. They are not what if. They are happening, which creates a feeling among the developing countries which we interact with, that the sort of cost-benefit conversation has changed. And I'll finish in saying that I had a sort of intuition of this kind when I composed the commission at the beginning, in giving a majority, a small majority, but a majority to people coming from developing countries in the composition of the Commission, which at the time was a sort of strange, because only big countries, in a way, were looking into that. And I think that's the shift. It says something. It simply increases the responsibility we have in taking the right decisions at the right moment.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Michael to come in, maybe to bring on the science perspective, and then we can hand over to Oliver to talk about comms, and then we can have a conversation around it.
Yes. The minister was really very elaborate on the type of science that's coming out already. But for the audience to understand how it actually, how these calculations are done, and you mentioned these many people who would actually die from heat. So if we just take an example, a child born in a cocoa plantation or a cocoa farmer family in Ghana, in 2080, where many of these calculations were done, this child will probably no longer be able to work on a cocoa farm, because cocoa is no longer a commodity that can be produced in this particular location. So all of Ghana will lose a lot of land that can be dedicated to cocoa planting. The export revenues will go down. The country might, if it doesn't shift to other economic opportunities, will actually become poorer. And this child that is born will most likely move to a city, and probably in 2080, at the age of 55, probably not be very healthy, consume too much sugar, has diabetes, and some sort of cardiovascular problem. A heat wave comes, and then you have a very high probability to die from the heat wave. So these are the calculations behind all of this. And a child that is born today has a very large likelihood that it will be around in 55 years from now, in 2080. So there's high predictive capacity to actually calculate the probability of death. What comes in addition is, so here we have the vulnerability aspects of the health condition of the person. The person might actually not be able to afford air conditioning and live in relatively poor housing where heat really accumulates. So here this dimension of adaptation probably will not come into place in time when temperatures are that high. So and these kind of calculations, which are behind these publications, can also be done with relatively high certainty, where probably the highest uncertainty comes from is the prediction of the heat wave. But even there, for heat to accumulate and higher temperatures on average, we know pretty well whether a particular heat wave with its very specific geographic characteristics, we have uncertainties. But on a global level, where things even out a little bit, overall we can be quite sure that these things will actually be real material issues that the world will face. Will Ghana have the power at that time to say, let's start engaging on cooling down the earth? Probably not. And probably the world will not care so much about, and it's harsh to say, about elderly people dying in 2080. And even now, as we would have to prepare for an SRM world, these triggers are probably not the strongest ones. However, with climate change, many things will happen. I just mentioned, shifts of agriculture, food security overall. Migration comes in. One issue I would like to motivate is the emergence of new pandemics, because what we will also face is ecosystems don't have legs and cannot run. They actually stay there and then will face climate change. And with this, diseases can spread much easier. And then all in a sudden, if a new pandemic really becomes a global pandemic, then people will really consider globally, can we actually come together and do something about the consequences of climate change? But this is at the time where we probably didn't really manage to regulate greenhouse gases in a way that that prevents all of these damages, let's say from a larger pandemic. And I think these are the narratives that are motivating why SRM is actually something we need to consider. It's really these more larger systemic risks that everyone on Earth can be touched, where people need to come together then and actually do something about the consequences of climate overshoot. Maybe I stop here and elaborate a little further later on.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Oliver to talk about the challenges of comms and framing.
Well, yes, I think before that, I should say thank you very much to the Minister for that outline of where we are and where we could be going. I should make clear that as well as being a journalist and a writer, I also have the honor of being the chair of the trustees of the Degrees Initiative, which is the organization which funds some of the researchers that the Minister was talking about, including Portia Dade-Williams in Ghana. And I should also say that if you want to learn more about the work of the Degrees Initiative, which I'm not here to represent, I'm speaking in my own capacity, you should talk to our Policy Engagement Officer, Anita, who is in the room, and we'll be very happy to talk to you on any subject degrees related. I think it's interesting that we're meeting here. It's interesting first that we're meeting at the Paris Peace Forum, which is an organization which has taken this issue seriously and diligently and come back to it again and again in a way that represents, I think, a really excellent model of engagement for these discussions. There's a danger always that I've noticed in my involvement with the field that solar geoengineering, solar radiation management always gets introduced as a new thing. The fact that the Overshoot Commission and before that other meetings of the Peace Forum have taken this on board for now almost a decade seems to me to provide a good platform for having these sort of conversations now that the idea is becoming both more urgent and more mainstream. It was striking to me that yesterday, I think Secretary General Guterres, I think, said for the first time in explicit terms that the overshoot is here, in talking rather interestingly to an indigenous journalist, Wahaji Pai. And he also talked about the need to change course and the idea that the overshoot might be temporary. Those are the sorts of thinking that lead people to thinking about solar geoengineering. It's not a debate, I think, that is particularly well represented in the media at the moment. There is resistance, there is what would, in less urgent conditions, be a becoming modesty on the part of many of the researchers involved, who are very keen not to overstep the role that they have as researchers simply to present what is known and what can be said with some authority. The opposition to this, these sorts of ideas, certainly feels itself less constrained. And I think that there's an imbalance in the communication of ideas about solar geoengineering which comes from that. And so I really welcome the idea that we're going to have a fuller discussion. And I also really welcome the idea that it's a discussion that will be housed in, to some extent, contributed to, and ideally, to some extent, led by countries in the global south like Ghana. That is the mission that we have at Degrees, is to empower researchers, civil society, governments, policymakers throughout the global south to take the position they absolutely have to take if we are to have a chance as a global community to use this, in the Minister's excellent phrase, as a tool of solidarity. That can only be realized if there's true expertise, communication and discussion all around the world, not just in some parts of it.
Thank you. Thank you for, we have around 20 minutes, I'm just looking at for us to sort of dive deep and have some conversations, further conversations around the different aspects of it. I'd like to start with a question with Pascal about how do we balance, well, how do we sort of navigate the tension between the urgency of the development, and then also how do you hold caution on these interventions, given there's a lot of unknown still? And then how do we transform research topic into policy tool? That's a very easy question.
Well, thanks God, it's a question which the Climate Overshoot Commission has roughly answered, which is the way to mitigate this tension is to invest in research. This is the main policy recommendation that we address, and we have addressed to governments, sovereigns, academic institutions, and it is happening. When you look at the amount of funding that goes into SRM science, it's happening. The problem being that whereas degrees, this initiative is trying to better balance the location and the stakeholders of this research, it still is extremely heavily northern bound. It's basically US, UK, who has put a lot of money on the table. China and India, although I would say not in that transparent way. And let me remind that our recommendations on fostering research is also about making this research more transparent. Who funds it, who owns it, and are the results properly shared as a sort of public good which is available to everybody. So that's where we are. I even heard that recently that the European Commission was now embarking on a search within the various DGs and the research departments to see whether in the next research and innovation program EU money should be invested in that. They haven't decided anything, but the fact that they've started considering this, I think, is a sign that things may follow this recommendation. But it has to be done in a way which is much more transparent than what has been done so far. And if I look, for instance, at the way Chicago University has recently invested roughly $100 million on SRM research, as well as on battery storage and a few other technical sort of research investments, I think this is the way to go.
Thank you.
Could I just come in on that?
Yeah, please.
I think, without wanting to pick at terminology, I think we have to be very careful about the assumption of unitary action, that that some undefined we is torn between caution and urgency. People's interests in these matters really do differ, and one of the things I think that's somewhat been a stumbling block for the community that involves itself in this is the idea that there will be a plan that will be a unitary plan. One of the great challenges for me in the governance area of this is dealing with the fact that this may happen for many unforeseen reasons, not necessarily for reasons of global climatic good, and the world needs to be prepared for that. And it's thinking about the European Union's interest in this, it's very interesting that they are actually looking very much at the question of how you can tell what is being done in the stratosphere. It's an absolutely terrifying idea to me that there is only one nation in the world which has fixed wing access to the stratosphere throughout across the planet. Only one nation. Europe has no way of reaching the stratosphere in fixed wing assets. Neither does anyone else except America. If we are serious about the idea that this is a debate, the time for which has come, then that's the sort of thing that people need to be really focused on. How do you assess the situation? How do you get the baseline? How do you know what is actually happening? And this is particularly important in the context, and you asked me to talk about communication. This is a very contested information environment. We have hearings in the US House of Representatives about the links between chemtrails and geoengineering. There is a huge amount of misinformation out there. You can't just chase out misinformation with good information, but you do actually have to have a way of getting good information. And that, to me, is, as well as research, which is obviously very valuable, that sense of setting up ways of looking at the world that will better serve the world as it is becoming seems to me also very urgent.
Go ahead, Michael. Opening so many can of worms that we're going to try to answer in 13 minutes.
I'm continuing.
Let's continue with cans of worms.
Just an illustration. So when people were flying in the stratosphere and taking actual air samples, one big surprise was that there was some particulate matter up there, mostly coming from rockets we sent into space, which was completely unexpected, and also shows us how little we know about the experiment in that sense. The other thing I think which is important is many people think, geoengineering, we will do this in 2200 however, when we do the calculations with the models, the real benefits from SRM would come about if we start to deploy it in latest 20 years from now. So here there's this time urgency on the research side that we need to learn so much about the stratosphere, how to do this, whether at all we want to do it, in a relatively short time period. It will probably take us another 3 years to get research money lined up in Europe, and then the call comes out, and then the projects will only start in 5 years from now. And that's already almost halfway to at least a quarter way to when we should have all the operational knowledge and the decision-making point whether we want to do this or not. So time is not really on our side. And then, of course, also the other issue which was discussed is how do we generate this internationally concerted governance system to do that. The Paris Agreement came into place, what was it?
10 years ago.
But 26 years ago after we started to negotiate, and the result currently is that we are heading towards overshoot. We are not solving the problem. We just had a negotiation breakthrough, which not necessarily means that we solve the problem. So here that there is really some element of urgency in all of this, which is really necessary, because we really don't want to do this in an ad hoc manner and hope it goes well. This is something we should not do.
So this conversation has given me so much anxiety for somebody who works on climate change, right? And and there's so many. So there are issues around science, the uncertainties of science, and also even if we put all the money that we can today, whether there are information that are unknowable, right? Because we don't have the full comprehension of how the different weather systems work with natural systems and how it impacts economy. So there's like research questions there. There's a whole governance question, which we're all touching on. And, 10 years ago, the world was at a very, very different place to where we are now, right? And in the absence of that, we are in, very deep geopolitical turmoil. In the absence of higher level of appetite for collaboration, what can be done? Because, and I think that's the question that we should be asking. I mean, we have so many questions, but one of the governance question, I think, is one of the fundamental questions that we sort of circle around. And I think that's probably we can spend the next 8 minutes to maybe unpack a little bit.
I think I pushed in on this a little bit earlier, so I'm going to be very, very brief. But in 1 minute, 1 year ago, when Secretary General Guterres had not talked about the actual mechanics of overshoot, I wrote an article suggesting that there were mechanisms for having discussions about this and especially about information sharing in this area under existing UN agreements. And I think that that's something that should be moved forward, but I don't think it's by any means the only thing that should be moved forward.
I agree with that. In terms of governance, I think the best idea on the market for the moment of things that are doable is this moratorium, although we have not yet seen a country or a small group of countries saying these are the conditions under which we enter into this commitment not to proceed to dangerous large experiments until we have this and this and this in science. But to answer your question, and if we had to redo with the Commission the conclusions, which now date from 2 years ago, I would say, don't you look at the research recommendation only on hard science. Also, please devote money, models on the socio-economic part of the problem we have to face. And the reality is that we not just have to balance the sort of north-south investment in hard science, we also have to balance the research in socio-economic, because it might change if we have the right numbers. It might change quite dramatically the sort of cost-benefit when the times come. We're not there. When the times come to say whether we should engage or not. And I think this is a lesson that we've learned since we produced the first recommendations of the Commission.
Well, if I could come in on the governance question. There was a time when, in addressing the debt crisis that the African continent faced, a number of conditions were put before us. When it was thought that the continent was facing a leadership crisis, democracy was on the decline, coup leaders were dominating. So the Bretton Woods would say that if you want these resources from us, commit to a democratic path and pursue those paths: constitutionalism, multi-party democracy, call an election, and all of that. We are now faced with another debt crisis after HIPIC and all of those rounds of. Can we begin to look at a model that says that as you demand debt forgiveness, as you demand a reconfiguration of the financial architecture, would you be willing to invest the gains that will be made from those discussions into investing in research so that the research is not dominated by those in the global north? Because the reality we face in Africa is that, I mean, when you are dealing with, serious crisis now, I mean, hunger, homelessness, deprivation, joblessness, I mean, very high unemployment rate and all of that, convincing your citizens that you want to take resources that should go into dealing with their, social crisis now, which is really about survival, it's really a discussion that a lot of, politicians will struggle, to initiate. But as we discuss, and recently, I mean, everybody is coming around the table that, look, something has to be done. We can't expect Africa to be paying over $70 billion just on interest rates and all of that. But if those gains are made, if there can be a certain understanding, a certain agreement that those gains will be channeled into investing in the science around climate change, particularly SRM, I think that way we can see the Global South also playing the role that we all expect, so that, as I talked about earlier, the global solidarity we seek to achieve then can be achieved. But at this point, if we don't address the rigged financial architecture and we don't also deal with the debt crisis and take some useful lessons from the 80s, 90s, how we were able to commit a lot of African countries to a democratic path, this time we can use the most existential crisis we face, which is climate change, to then develop a paradigm which helps us, to get the investment that we need. So I think that if we look at some of these creative governance models, we can see increased funding and we can see a lot more governments committing. And we will not only have to rely on the Degrees Initiative, which we are very grateful for, but the question is, can they go it alone? How sustainable is that? And so that's how I look at the governance question as well.
Thank you. That's super pragmatic approach. We have a little bit of 2 minutes. I'm going to ask the other three panelists maybe to share your 30-second insight reflection on how do we sort of think about the challenge of SRM management and development.
Just spinning further from what the minister said, we have a common practice in macro financial prudency in terms of stress testing macroeconomies. These models are currently also using climate information and do forward-looking stress testing. One can use these kind of methodologies, combine it with the climate science, and engage in a co-creation where we also run scenarios of a governance system looking at the issue whether or not this is an option or not, but really from a country-led position, very much motivated by a financial stability and societal stability calculus, and have this bottom-up construction and then inform globally coordinated scenarios of overshoot in combination with SRM. This is something that would be possible today, and the springboard would be both the Overshoot Commission and the Degrees Initiative. It's just combining a few dots and get going.
Nice.
In 30 seconds, I'll take an analogy. Let's assume SRM is AI. My conclusion would be give, for the moment, a priority to developing country prompts. They are the ones, for the moment, that should give the main prompts to get the right answers.
Gosh, the clock just turned just at the moment I was saying it. I think the important thing to remember is that this would be an extremely hard problem to tackle if the international community were in the best of conditions. It is very far from being in the best of conditions, but that does not in any way obviate the need to try and to use as many parallel ways of approaching this as possible. But I think the analogy of the prompt is very well taken. We need to understand development and climate more closely without even thinking about solar geoengineering. And then we need to add that to it, and we need to, you see, I'm going on about we, because I know all of us in this room are the sort of people who would like this. There needs to be a way of making these debates happen in various different fora so that a certain progress can actually be assured, because, as Michael pointed out, time is not on our side. Time is, in fact, our enemy here. We need to make use of the decade to come.
Right. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I went through a lot of anxiety, and hopefully towards the end, we can see a path forward. Well, I think that's the thing, that if you work on climate change, you have to go through that, right? Science, heart, brain, and heart. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.